Hey guys, it's Whitney. I am going to summarize chapter 14 of Skinner's About Behaviorism book. It is called Summing Up, which is quite appropriate. So he is in this chapter, he's referring back to the introduction and 20 common criticisms of behaviorism. So he uses this chapter to summarize his responses to those criticisms and also to look towards the future of behaviorism. So I don't have time to go over all 20, but I think I'm going to go over 8. And I think all of those I talk about are in the PowerPoint. So the first one is the assertion that behaviorism ignores feelings, consciousness, and self-knowledge. So that it doesn't take those things into account when explaining behavior. Skinner argues that those things are taken into account, but they're looked at in a different way by behaviorists. So thinking is just behavior, but it's just under the skin behavior. And our thinking behaviors, including those things like consciousness, are products of the contingencies in our social environment. We have to look at self-knowledge carefully because it is also a product of our social environment. Our environment asks us questions about ourselves, and we are taught what to pay attention to about ourselves. So we're taught to be aware of what we're aware of. We have to be careful about that because we can't always describe our feelings and our bodily conditions. They may be accurate, they may not be. So another argument against behaviorism is that it represents us as just robots, as simple stimulus response machines. And this came about partly because of the philosophies of Descartes and Pavlov and the science of reflexes. So something in the environment eliciting a response. And we do have reflexes, which are simple and they're more explainable or they're more obvious than operant responding. But because we don't act like robots, reflexes can't account for everything. So for the most part, operant responding, environmental stimuli, operant responding is more responsible for our behavior. And environmental stimuli don't elicit responding. They only alter the possibilities or the probabilities of certain responding in certain situations. Another argument against behaviorism is that it does not take cognitive processes into account. But Skinner asserts that these cognitive processes that we do constantly, like searching or analyzing or discriminating between complex things, are just behaviors. And they are subject to the same contingencies of reinforcement as our overt behaviors like throwing a ball or talking or driving a car. And he also adds that there aren't really any adequate theories of human thinking or human thought, especially ones that aren't mentalistic or circular. So a fourth argument is that behaviorism discounts intentions or purposes. Skinner says that purposes or feelings or intents do not in themselves cause action or behavior. We do things because of our reinforcement history and current conditions, which move us to act and also cause physical conditions in our body that we've been taught to call things like purpose or feelings. A fifth argument is that it leaves out the idea of a self and that self's influence on our behaviors, especially personality. Skinner says that we have a sense of self, or we have a self in the sense that I am me and nobody else is me. No one has the same history as me or the same life, so no one has the same behavioral repertoire as me. So I have become a unique person as I've learned my own special repertoire of behaviors. He just doesn't accept that our self is the originator of our behaviors. Another argument is that behaviorism is limited to just the prediction and control of behavior, and therefore misses what it really means to be a human essence. Skinner argues that operant conditioning, they may have prediction and control involved, as other sciences do as well, but the main goal is to interpret and to understand. So if we don't understand the relation between what we do and how the environment influences it, then how can we come closer to understanding the essential features of what it is to be a human? Another criticism is that most of the studies, and therefore the principles of behaviorism, have mostly come from animal studies, especially rats and pigeons. A lot of the early experiments were done with animals, but a lot of research is now done with people. Many of the natural sciences have started with animals just for simplicity, but they focus on basic features that we humans do share with animals, especially a lot of our nervous systems. And we don't find out what is uniquely human until we compare animal studies with human studies. So another argument against behaviorism is that it's impossible to apply the findings from a controlled lab setting into the real world and social groups and larger social problems. But once again, many sciences have relied on principles discovered in controlled settings and are used to interpret real-life events. He uses the example of an aircraft. We can't study it flying and its flying behavior until we have built it. But to be built well, it needs to be built according to principles found in a lab setting. So the results that we get from a lab setting, and in behaviorism's case, it's reinforcement and punishment, give us the tools to more accurately interpret what goes on in the real world and to leave behind those things that don't explain behavior. And a final argument we'll discuss is that behaviorism is dehumanizing or reductionistic, that it doesn't give a full picture of the complexity of human beings and our behavior. But he says those that argue this can't really say what makes us human. They don't give us what we're leaving out, they say. Or they believe in purposes and choices which they believe make us human. But behaviorism says these things can be studied by science. All of human behavior, including all those thoughts and feelings, are, in the real realm of science. And they should be studied, but in reference to environmental contingencies. And human behavior, behaviorism believes, is determined and lawful, but we're not saying that those laws are simple. He uses the example here of a refrigerator. Certain laws dictate how a refrigerator runs, but those laws are not the laws that define and generate human behavior. They're very different. They're much more complex. And he goes on to recognize human achievements, including the bad ones and the current dilemmas of overpopulation, pollution, possibly climate change, nuclear threats. But he says that if we don't recognize ourselves for what we are and our limits, then we will not be equipped to solve those problems. So we must move beyond these mentalistic explanations of feelings and purposes and intents and selves and realize how our behavior is formed and how it's maintained by the environment. So finally, he sums up by talking about the future of behaviorism in light of where it is now, or was at the time of his writing this book. So he says there are a lot of variations of behavioral science out there, but a lot of them are mentalistic. And, he says you can't find, in one place you can't find two behaviorists who agree or the same approach. He does suggest that these variations may be like mutations, and they may go through the natural selection process to eventually give us one most effective approach to behavior analysis. So to go from here, the next question would be to behaviorism: how do you solve these world problems like war or addiction or crime, poverty? But he says just by understanding the principles of behavior does not give us a solution. It's a starting point. But he gives the example of understanding aerodynamics. You can understand it, but that does not make you immediately able to build a plane. We must know these principles and also know the practical details of each problem. This means that collaboration must occur between many sciences and the people who are involved directly with these problems. And when behaviorism is fully understood, we realize that manipulating and changing the environment is our best bet at changing behaviors. And it will make them not only efficient, but it will also help make us successful, healthy, and happy. So here is my one reference. I hope you were able to get a little clarification and understand, and I hope you enjoyed the book. And let me know if you have any questions.